Hi, everyone. We'll get the session going now. Thank you so much for joining us in this panel this morning. So I'm delighted to welcome you to this critical discussion on AI trust and safety, balancing innovation and reimagining trust and safety in the African context. And thank you to the organizers and the government of Rwanda for having us for this important dialogue. So today comes at a pivotal moment, and I think you've heard that throughout the conference so far. AI is reshaping economies and societies globally, and governments worldwide are really rushing to think about what tools should they be utilizing to advance trust and safety while also securing economic security in their countries too. So for Africa, this really represents both a challenge and an unprecedented opportunity for leadership. So as Africa stands at a unique crossroads, and I think we've heard this throughout the conference so far, we have the chance to learn from early adopters. We've heard examples internationally on how other countries are taking different approaches. The decisions we make today about AI governance will not just shape technological outcomes, but the very fabric of our societies. And I think we'll hear from our experts shortly with some really, really good examples about what are some of the implications when we think about getting this right, when we think about trust and safety. So we have a few themes that we'll go through this session, and 4 in particular that I want to highlight before I invite our panelists on stage. The first is that we want to establish a clear understanding of trust and safety. I'm not sure who read the title and thought, what do we mean by trust and safety, really, actually? And so we're really trying to dive into what do we actually mean in this moment. Second, we'll explore the balance between international alignment and local innovation. So how do we ensure that we're thinking about, the OECD, what the UN is doing, but what does it mean for Africa to have a distinctive approach when we're thinking about trust and safety? Third, we'll examine the technical mechanisms and institutional infrastructure needed for trust and safety. So when we think about standards and risk assessments, what might we want to put in place as we're thinking about growing models on the continent? And then finally, what does that mean from an institutional perspective? How do you house those mechanisms in specific institutions that can really elevate the companies on the continent, but also ensure that diverse perspectives can help shape the way we're designing trust and safety? So without delaying any further, I'm so excited to invite these wonderful panelists onto the stage. And I would start with Dr. Joy Bwalamwini. She's the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League and author of Unmasking AI. Her groundbreaking MIT research exposed racial and gender biases in facial recognition technology. Leading major technology companies really have to think about how they reassess and their AI systems based on a lot of the research that Joy has led. She's a Rhodes Scholar and featured in the documentary, or led the documentary, I should say, Coded Bias. And I have long been a fan of her work. So, Dr. Joy, I'd love to welcome you onto the stage. Next, we have Rachel Adams, and Dr. Rachel is the CEO of the Global Center on AI Governance. She's a recognized leader in AI ethics and policy. She brings together policymakers, industry leaders, and researchers to develop frameworks that promote responsible AI development, and her expertise has really shaped a number of regulatory approaches worldwide. So, Dr. Rachel, we'd love to welcome you to the stage. Next, we have Jennifer Louis. She serves as an AI trust and safety expert at the UNDP, focusing on developing AI solutions responsive to local contexts. So really an expert in a lot of the themes we're going to be discussing today. And as founder of the Moral Innovation Lab and a Harvard Berkman Klein Center affiliate, she examines how technology shapes moral futures. Jennifer, we would love to welcome you to the stage. And last but not least, we have Professor Salma Abbasi, who is the chairman and CEO, or chairwoman and CEO, I'm not sure how we frame that these days, of E-Worldwide Group. Working with governments and development agencies, she creates frameworks and policies integrating AI, blockchain, and IoT for meaningful digital transformation. Welcome to the stage, and thank you for joining us. So, we really want to start with setting the context for you all, and really starting at, what do we mean, again, by trust and safety? So I've given Dr. Joy the fun challenge of trying to paint a picture for us, a really tangible example that illustrates what we mean by trust and safety in this moment, but we'll start there.
Yes, so we're talking trust, we're talking safety. And when we're looking at where we are with the development of AI, there is so much excitement, right? And in that excitement, there are also people saying, maybe we should slow down. Some of the people saying we should slow down are known as the doomers. They're talking about existential risk. The AI becomes super intelligent, takes over the world, Terminator. We need safety, right? Others, sometimes they call them the gloomers. They're like, all right, hypothetical risks for some AGI that doesn't even yet exist. What about the AI that's here today and the types of risks that we're seeing? So earlier you talked about my research with gender shades. For those who are not as familiar, this was one of the most influential AI bias research papers that came out. And what we were doing then was showing that our measures of success for AI were not adequate. And the reason they weren't adequate is because oftentimes the data sets that were used to evaluate how well AI systems work didn't include us. They weren't representative. They were often what I call pale male data sets. No offense to the pale males in the audience, right? And one of the things we did was actually create a more inclusive data set, starting in Rwanda, because at the time, women were severely underrepresented in these data sets, as were people with lighter skin. So we went to the UN Women's website, got a list of the top 10 nations in the world by their representation of women in parliament. Rwanda was number one. So it was the faces, right, of the Rwandan parliament members, as well as Senegal, South Africa, and then we're going global, so we also included some Nordic countries as well. And what we were able to show with more inclusive data sets for measuring our progress was that companies, IBM, Microsoft, later on Amazon, actually weren't performing as well as we thought they would be. And so now what are some of the implications of this, right? Think about self-driving cars. We're excited about what that might be, but pedestrian tracking systems, if they don't see you, that could be a problem. You have studies showing that people who are vertically challenged, like myself, or children, right, being harmed in those systems. And with facial recognition technologies, we've seen misidentifications, false arrests, and so forth, some of those which are featured in the film Coded Bias. And being on the continent as well, when we're thinking about trust and safety, it's not just at the deployment phase of these technologies, but we also have to think about design and development and the data pipeline that's feeding into it. And so we have other types of harms with the people who are developing these systems, but also the people who are tasked to do the dirty data cleaning, right? So data workers, we've had profiles of data workers in Kenya being paid less than $2 an hour and being exposed to some of the most toxic of content in order to prepare large language models that power so many of the AI systems that are making headlines. So I'll stop there, but we have a lot to talk about when it comes to trust and safety.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for laying that out. I think that's a brilliant example. We've also done some work on data labelers, and including a lot of data labelers based on the continent. We work very closely with African Content Moderators Union based out of Kenya, for example. So really, really good illustration. So Dr. Rachel, why don't we come to you next, actually, to try and give us another example. How else should we be thinking about this? And what is an example that really illustrates why we should care about trust and safety on the continent?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important to kind of take stock of how significant this debate around AI safety has become. It has become the kind of crowning conversation around the kind of AI we want to see that is not harmful to our societies. And I think in some ways it's overtaking discourses on responsible AI and ethical AI, and that may be really detrimental if we start displacing some of those kind of core principles and issues we were trying to address with the conversation and standards that are emerging around AI ethics. So I think one of the concerns that I have is that the AI safety discourse, while it is, you know, as you say, Joy, we're recognizing a wider range of harms that exist now already, we are still talking about only technical solutions. And this has been why African institutions and expertise have partly been left out of global debates around AI safety because it has been confined to what is the technical response and the technical solutions we need to see to prevent the kind of harms that we are seeing and potentially manifesting. But these harms are socioeconomic harms, and they will require social scientists and interdisciplinary conversations to identify and document where these harms are occurring. So we are working on kind of bringing African perspectives into the debates and the discourse around African AI, around AI safety in Africa. And some of the harms that we're talking about are the harms of climate and the environmental impact of if we're scaling up AI on the continent. We're talking about massive investments in data centers. These come at environmental costs, which implicate the environmental security of communities. This is an issue of safety, and we need to put this on the table. One of the other ones I think is really important, and I want to highlight the work of Gender Rights in Tech in South Africa, is women's safety. Generative AI is creating new capabilities for deep fakes, online harassment and stalking, which is really creating online and offline safety implications for women, for girls. And this is something that as part of the Women's 20 under the G20, we're raising as a priority issue. And again, this is a safety issue and should be squarely within what we're talking about when we're talking about AI safety.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think you raised a good point there about new capabilities. And Dr. Joy, we'll come back to you briefly on this question of capability, because I think what we've heard through this conference is that there's a massive opportunity here. And I think something that we've been talking about a lot internationally is emerging capability. So you might have heard a lot about the AI agents that companies are hoping to deploy internationally. And I think what we would like to understand is, we've, of course, as you mentioned, we're experiencing some harms now. And whilst we're, of course, excited about capabilities, what do we need to be thinking about in the future as capabilities scale? Do you think that a lot of the harms that you shared at the moment are things that will remain the same? Will they change as capabilities shift? What should we be aware of?
I'd like to address that, but first, I don't think the reason Africans have been left out of the AI safety conversation is due to a lack of technical expertise, right? And I'm not sure that's exactly what you meant, but I think it's really important to what you were saying in that socio-technical perspective, that we are drawing on the expertise in the continent and outside of the continent as well. And so I think sometimes there certainly is a move within tech companies or governments around the world to say, because this is a technical conversation, we're assuming that the technical expertise is in the global north or it's Western, which, just having gone to the research colloquium that was here, there's so much brilliant technical expertise on the continent. So I just wanted to say that first. Now, to the point in terms of AR harms evolving, I think we have to stay vigilant. That's probably one of the most important lessons I've learned from the Algorithmic Justice League. When we were talking about algorithmic bias and algorithmic discrimination starting in 2016, people would look at me, what do you mean computers can be biased? And what's this AI thing you're talking about anyways, right? Now we're in a different part of the conversation where in most global settings, right, you will hear a nod to algorithmic bias or discrimination, and certainly to safety, right, and trustworthiness. And I think we might be reaching a point where there's assumed notion that we know what the harms are, right, and what to look out for. And what I'm advocating for is, how do we actually create mechanisms and processes so we can continue to learn about evolving harms? Because that taxonomy of what harms looks like continues to evolve.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think we'll come back to this point around expertise and on the continent when we come back to the technical solutions question through this panel. So Professor Salma, why don't we come to you next? And staying on this theme of how we're sort of thinking about and defining trust and safety, what are some of the risks from your perspective that we should be thinking about in today's landscape, and do those align with some of the examples we've had so far?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. I think it's a pleasure to be here with such famous people that are in this area of AI. understanding how AI is evolving and how it's been integrated into our socializing is the context I'd like to bring up from safety. AI is not new. As an ASIC chip designer from 1980, I know that we used Voltran way back when. So the whole process has been, I'd like to say, it's made very, very complicated unnecessarily. The safeguarding that we need to put in place for our children is where we need to understand how AI is being used. The data manipulation, we touched briefly on the deep fake. Last December, we launched a new policy for the Gambia for online safety. Not online safety for children alone, online safety for women, for the elderly, and for the disabled, who are being scammed online as we push our populations to get more and more services online. I think we need to take a holistic approach on what are the risks. Of course, I don't want to be one of the doomers and gloomers. I'm teaching ethical AI for
also
SDGs.
bloomers.
Yeah. So for me, I think we have to look at building holistic digital resilience in our young people. When we talk about digital skills, we have to understand the threats. I'd love to give an example of United Kingdom. I mentioned the Gambia because they're now looking at 4 different vulnerable groups. There's issues in the United Kingdom of AI dopamine-driven algorithms that are pushing hate content, violent content. Recently, a couple of months ago, we had a shooting of a young man killed his mother and his brother and sister, and he was obsessively looking at mass school shooting. Now, that information was being pushed to him. I'm calling it the invisible online pandemic. And I believe that regulators and service providers have a duty of care. So when we talk about safety, where is the accountability? So when we talk about standards, I'll come to it. But for me, the risk is very, very evident in the United Kingdom. You mentioned gender-based violence online, the harassment that women are facing. Now, couple on that, the latest trend is the technology-facilitated gender violence. A lot of work has been done and research we're doing with women's groups and within my universities, students from Nigeria, from Rwanda, from the Gambia, but also from India, Malaysia, Nepal, and many others, understanding their lived experiences online. And without that information to feed into the data, the standards that we want to have and produce, and the frameworks, we will miss those evolving threats, especially with Gen AI.
Yeah,
Stop
brilliant.
there.
Thank you so much. So I think we want to shift into, now that I think we've tried to crystallize what we mean by trust and safety through some really great examples here. And I think what we really want to try and test is, how should Africa be thinking about trust and safety in this moment? And before we we come to you, Jennifer, on some of the work you've done around localizing how we're thinking about trust and safety, just to put it in the global context, because we've been talking about this together, the fact that in this moment, safety means many, many different things, and we're seeing countries shifting their use of safety to security now. So for example, in the UK, you now have what was previously the UK AI Safety Institute is now the AI Security Institute. And so I think capping off this defining basis for our session, what are the core elements, regardless of whatever terminology we use, is it safety, is it security? What are some core elements we think should be preserved that should really guide how Africa thinks about trust and safety? And so, Rachel, why don't I come to you, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps just to clarify, there's immense technical talent here. That's not the reason I think Africa has been left out. I think the reason is, the assumption is that it is the countries who have access to the AI labs, and those labs being housed in, the UK and the US, etc., are the countries that should be leading this conversation, and therefore, because Africa is not housing any of these AI labs and doesn't have access to these models, it's not been seen as a kind of priority region. Although I think there have been a lot of efforts to include African perspectives, but I think there's more that could be done there. So I think on some of the kind of core principles, and I think Salma can speak to many of these very well, there's still principles around public participation and awareness of the impacts of this technology and what these might look like, how these might show up and manifest in people's lives. And as Joy said, we don't know enough. We don't have enough kind of evidence. We can imagine a lot of these harms. We can see correlations between kind of misinformation and what that's causing and the role AI is playing, but we still need to almost kind of democratize the evidence gathering and the documentation and the understanding of how harms manifest in everyday lives, which means that people need to know about artificial intelligence, they need to know about the risks associated with this, and it's the job of a wide range of actors to do that. Absolutely, governments and regulators, institutions of democracy play a really, really important role in promoting awareness. But I've also seen, incredible developers working across the continent that are doing work in very careful, mindful ways where when they're engaging with community health workers, when they're collecting data from underrepresented groups, they're using that as an advocacy opportunity to engage and mobilize and teach people about these technologies. I mean, I think we're seeing how fast they're evolving and how the kind of new challenges associated with agentic AI, so the ethical implications are not fully resolved and fully known, which means we need more people involved in the conversation around when is this an ethical challenge? What do these look like? And so I think that's one of the kind of core principles I'd like to highlight.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So now we'll shift to really looking at the international stage, and we're so delighted to have you here, Jenna, from the UN, to really think about where should Africa be kind of looking to global frameworks to inform its approach, but also where is there a real need to kind of localize an approach to trust and safety. So I think through this conference, we've heard about the Global Digital Compact, for example, which was finalized in September and ratified, and countries are now thinking about how do I implement the Global Digital Compact, and there is a clear call out of trust and safety in the framework itself. So as African countries really think about scaling AI development and deployment, and as they look to the Global Digital Compact, where is there an opportunity to align with what you think how other countries will approach the implementation, but also where is there a need and opportunity to really localize on the continent and have a distinctive approach?
Sure. I want to echo what Rachel had said and actually infuse that the word sovereignty and safety sovereignty, I think, is very important in this moment when it comes to how we envision the future of AI safety, security. I also think that this shift to security, we should ask ourselves who is privileged in that kind of shift in language, and then essentially who becomes disenfranchised by it. The reason why I think it's good to reinforce this is that in my work over 17 years, mostly in big tech, creating these systems, in some ways this is a bit of an atonement for all of these years of looking back at it and thinking I maybe did it wrong, honestly. I see that trust and safety, as it has been deployed in the past, has been perhaps one of the greatest colonizing forces of our time. And I think that that's why we need to reinforce a means of solutions that really thinks about this at a local empowerment level. And what I mean by that is that I think that there is actually evidence that this is not, again, as you mentioned before, it's really at the development stage. It's really all the way through the life cycle and supply chain of the development of this technology. I think we're all impacted by it. And I sometimes would like to bring in the example of authentication. We now know that deep fakes and soft fakes, that all of the technologies that are going to contribute to authentication are going to be a huge problem. And this is where bias is going to have a huge play because we are at war in this. East Africa leads in mobile banking. However, 27% of authentication problems have happened. So that means that people have been completely disabled from accessing their money. And why is that, right? And part of it is because we can't authenticate them in ways that are actually locally contextual based on types of data that we have here, right? The ways that we assess credit scores cannot be assessed in the same ways that we would assess it in Western countries, right? And so these kind of disable our abilities to think creatively. But I also believe that the greatest innovations will come here because innovation to me is not going to work if innovation is about replicating the sins and the problems of our past, right? So one of our greatest problems is the inequity issue of it, and we haven't gotten creative about that. So for me, I think that the local enablement piece really is about thinking about creatively about the data that we actually have, the ways that it can be leveraged to authenticate effectively, the ways that that can actually open up the economy, right? 27% of people should not be impacted by not being able to access their mobile banking accounts. And the fact that AI is going to significantly ratchet that up. I mean, South Africa has seen a 78% raise since 2023 in cyber attacks, for example. And that's huge. I mean, that's just, and then our answers to that at a global scale are to to block disinformation. I heard that like in the Kenyan elections, we just blocked the internet. Every hour that the internet is blocked, it's a $12 million loss. So I think we have to think, again, creatively on like how do you enable people locally, how it is that we access data sets. I think open source, but not open source by all means. I mean, I actually think licensing might be better. And really listen to the case examples of how it is that that harms are manifesting at the local level.
Yeah, some really, really brilliant examples there. And yeah, I agree with the applause I just heard from the audience. And I think that point you raised about openness is just one example of like openness has massive potential and could be really, really critical for the continent as one example. And so to what extent are we seeing the needs of the continent reflected in global frameworks and standards? And where are there gaps? And so Professor Salma, we'll come to you next. Could you point to any kind of global frameworks or standards that you think could really help with, I mean, interoperability is still important, but what critical gaps do you think also exist?
Well, thank you for the question. I totally agree with you. I was saying that in my mind, thinking that cybersecurity and AI need to go hand in hand. We have to have our resilience in this space. I think one of the other things that's very important to note, that shift from safety to security, the paradigm shift has really been caused since we have a new, government in power. And while I was in Davos talking on day one about quantum innovation and the inequity that will happen and how do we address that gap, it's very important to understand that day two, $500 billion was announced in the US for three countries. For three companies, and what that means to us. Then you have DeepSeek coming up. So the landscape is continuously shifting. The ability without the right cyber framework in place to block and cut data and skew the decision that is made is a huge threat. When we talk about gaps in policies, that is one that I believe we need to work more closely on in collaboration as a continent in the cybersecurity framework. I know that ECA is doing a lot of work in this area. For me, I would look back as a social scientist and a technologist. I'm living at the cusp, trying to look at the issues impacting people's lives. I think that, again, I mentioned regulators, which we'll come to, I think, later. But we need to, a couple of weeks ago, they had the AI Standards Hub meeting in London. It was a global meeting. There was very little, I think only one person from Africa was represented on the stage. And I noted that, like, where's the rest of the world with the population? This Asia and Africa, which is why I'm teaching in these two continents for the next generation to think about themselves and their own innovation. We have standards that have been created, guidelines and principles that the IEEE has. I've been working from them since they designed the first standards on ASIC chips, which have historically been there, that everybody has used as a baseline. We have the principles for accountability, for governance, transparency, privacy. The governance frameworks are in many, many operations. You have the OECD. Everybody looks at the OECD. We look at the ISO standards. When we were having a discussion in Europe, even within Europe, they were saying, well, these are our European standards. And I was listening to them thinking, this is so wrong. We need to have a global collaboration. Within those 5 components that are standards and frameworks from the IEEE, they were made collectively. 2017, they also made thick volume, for those of you who want to read, ethically aligned design principles with AI in the core, putting human well-being. That's shifted. tremendously to now economic empowerment. How do I make more money? How do I use your data to exploit you, manipulate you for my agenda? That's the fear I have for Africa, moving fast without building the capacity of the institutions, the policies, the governance, the regulator. If their mandate is to regulate this space, let's do it together. I'm delighted to hear about the hub of safety, but the universities are nucleuses that we need to connect and collaborate so that we don't reinvent the wheel and we localize what we can address those critical gaps.
That's some really, really good examples there. And you remind me actually about how the international standards system works, which is that you look to the international level where there's an opportunity for global collaboration, but you have European standards bodies because the assumption is that every region should be able to create distinct standards where they don't exist at the international level to account for their local needs. That's a great point. What does that mean from an African context? What does it mean to really localize standardization in a way that really works for a lot of the work that is...
Or participate in the global ones,
exactly.
Influence them. Yeah.
That too, that very, very importantly. So Dr. Joy, why don't we come to you next? Again, returning to this point that I think we've had a lot of momentum about this desire to have greater adoption and really development and deployment of AI on the continent. But what specific technical mechanisms do you think should really be prioritized? I know you've done so much work in this space. So for example, should standardized risk assessment frameworks be something that is implemented? What do you think might be needed?
Yes, I want to give this example of Dawa Health, which is a startup based in Lusaka, Zambia. Last time I was living in the continent, I was a Fulbright fellow there and working out of Bongo Hive. And so about 810 women die daily of maternal health complications that are preventable. 2/3 of those women are in sub-Saharan Africa, and you have about 30 million women here who do not have access to timely and affordable medical information that could actually prevent some of these complications and some of these deaths. And on top of that, you have about half of children being born also dying of preventable complications. And so you got the problem, right? So then you got the startup, let's address the problem. So what they decided to do was to create this app called Dawa Mom. And the idea is to have a chatbot that people can interact with so they can get the medical information they need before they actually give birth. And then if there are any complications, also continuing to give that information, right? And so where does the technical part come in? Well, the way they started to build this app was first they tried to get local data. When that data was limited, they then went online for what was open source. So there's a platform called Kaggle. And they were looking at maternal health data sets. The problem here is those data sets were not contextualized to the local situation, and also the modality of using a chatbot in this case did not make sense. Many of the women had feature phones, or if the phones that had more capabilities were in the hands of their husbands, which they couldn't access as easily. So one thing that I think would be really important to do is understanding both data provenance of these systems and thinking through ways in which we can at least have transparency so you know if there's some deficiencies, right? So some people here might have heard of ideas like data nutrition labels, data sheets for data sets, and so forth. But I think it's so important when we're thinking about the design, development, and deployment of these systems. To your point with algorithmic assessments, I think that's also critical. Like once you've actually deployed it, oftentimes we don't know if these systems are fit for purpose in the first place. So before doing the full-scale deployment, right, do that fit for purpose test, sandbox a little bit. Can we pilot, right, before we go in wholesale? And so I think those algorithmic assessments are important. And with that, as much as we're talking about technical mechanisms, to your point earlier, Rachel, it needs to be socio-technical. This example that I'm talking about with Dawa Mom, the person who was looking at it was an ethnographer, right? And they were actually looking at the ways in which data has been colonized in health and why that might make a difference when you're thinking about the knowledge base and the taxonomies that then inform something like a chatbot. So those are a few examples.
Yeah. And what specialized expertise do you think we will need on the continent to ensure that we have these technical mechanisms in place? So I know you mentioned earlier that a lot of this expertise exists, and it's that local expertise that we need. So what do you think is out there, but also where might we want to grow our expertise? And Jennifer, I'll also come to you on this question after Dr. Joy.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas that I'm really excited is around language and culture. And there's so much wonderful cultural production, knowledge preservation that needs to happen. And so I also think of expertise not just being in domain experts, right, but lived experience. So how do we actually bring in everyday people to contribute their perspectives to what's going to be made? And I made this problem kind of issue all the time as an entrepreneur. Started a hair care technology company, ed tech company. Didn't actually go talk to the people who were going to use the thing, right? Bit of a problem. So I think that's important. Another example that really inspires me is some of the work with FarmerLine in Ghana. And so they have a system of actually providing information to farmers so they can have higher yields and make more money. And the way that they do it is they're using natural language processing, and they are creating small language models that I think now are available in over 260 local languages. So in Ghana alone, there are over 40, Nigeria 200, et cetera. They reach about 1.1 million farmers and are feeding, I want to say, about 1 billion people in the world. And so that type of expertise of saying, okay, what do we know about agriculture? And now how do we bring that with what's happening with AI? I think seeing that multidisciplinary pairing is also going to continue to be important.
Brilliant. At this moment, I should also flag that we want to do Q&A in this session. I know we haven't really seen it through the conference so far, so I forgot to mention at the beginning, if you have any questions, please queue them up. We'll come to Q&A in about 10 minutes or so. Jennifer, when it comes to you on this question, I know that under the UN system, we also have the ITU. I know we're talking about standardization. We're talking about the types of skills we need for technical assessment on the continent. What are your thoughts on the expertise we need to put these things in place?
I mean, I think, as mentioned before, the expertise are actually already there. I think sometimes it's about the reframing of the problem. We have right now actually a global open call to reimagine trust and safety with the UNDP, to co-design new solutions together. So I encourage everyone here to apply. But what we found is that, at least from our first 2 rounds, people are so intent on closing the gap, as if there is a gap. When we talk about reimagination, we need to completely dismantle it. I don't think it's that the skills aren't there, because clearly people are well and above and beyond skilled. Like, their CVs are absolutely insane. But it's like, oh, but we just need to be a little bit more like NIST. Oh, we need to be more like, what's happening in Europe. And I'm like, actually, no, not necessarily. I think the most inventive and interesting applications that we've seen thus far are those who are like, this is not working for us at all. In fact, the problems that we're trying to solve should not be defined the way that you've articulated them. And I'm like, thank you for that challenge. Thank you for telling me that the question that we have posed is actually not relevant to your environment. And so this is where I'm like, it's not, for me at least, a question of like, how do we improve the skills? It's more that the skills need to be applied to the problem, and the problem needs to not be defined by me. The problem should be defined locally.
Clapping to that.
Yeah, I'm adding the
Fantastic. So we'll come to institutions now, and really institution building. So I think we've defined the sort of problems. We've talked about alignment with international, localizing, and the types of technical assessment. How do we house this in institutions on the continent? So Rachel, why don't we come to you next? As we're sort of looking at institutional frameworks, what types of organizations do you think that will need to establish or are already in existence where we can really think about housing some of these trust and safety mechanisms, for example, some of the approaches that Dr. Joy mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think we at the Global Center on AI Governance, we do a lot of training and teaching with regulators across the continent, and we've been overwhelmed by the interest by data protection authorities and competition commissions and national human rights institutions to start thinking about these issues. And I think they all play really important roles, and I think they're primed and ready. I think there's still capacity gaps, not in terms of knowledge, but in terms of funding and the ability of these institutions to deal with overwhelming numbers, particularly when we're talking about kind of medical devices and the standards there, where we've got an existing set of standards, and many of these AI technologies fall under this very broad definition of a medical device, yet they're kind of lower risk because they're just providing advice to mothers that might be go and seek proper medical device, but gives kind of risk ratios and give kind of early warning systems, but are being classified as a medical device and therefore going through a very long and lengthy regulatory pathway that is shutting out some local developers, that the cost of compliance might be disproportionate to the level of risk. But also the regulators themselves are absolutely overwhelmed, and particularly on the medical device side, and are struggling to kind of deal with the very complex set of ethical issues that they're now having to manage. And I think that's absolutely the same with our research ethics committees at universities, who, we've got many incredible research projects across domains and sectors that are now integrating AI in really powerful ways. And research ethics committees are staggered with these kind of new issues that they're needing to look at and address. And so I think there's kind of capacity strengthening work that is really sorely needed there. And then I think there's the opportunity to look to create an African AI safety hub that brings together the incredible interdisciplinary African expertise to really start kind of formalizing a lot of the thinking that we have going on. There's so many unanswered questions in this space, and I think there's incredible kind of traditions of thought and philosophy within African knowledge systems that we need to be drawing on more when we're thinking about what is the kind of society we want to be. We want these technologies to serve, not to dominate.
Yeah, brilliant. Jennifer, I'll come to you next, because I think as we're sort of thinking about designing institutions, you kind of have like the local, domestic, you have the regional, continental, as you mentioned, something like an African AI safety hub, and you have the international. So the UN announced the UN scientific panel, which I know everyone's very excited about, no pressure on the UN side. And I think there's a question around how you link those different levels and what institutions should do that linking. And so as we're sort of thinking about what institutions Africa might need in place, is there an existing institution that can play a role, like to link between the levels? Or do you think there's something new, maybe, that we might need to, one example maybe being a safety institute that can work at the international level, but also ensures that it is focused on local needs distinctly?
Yes, I'm very excited to hear about having safety institutions that are localized. And I do think that it's a new burgeoning area because I don't think it's been formalized as it needs to be. I also think that it's not entirely always just about institutions, but also thinking about business sectors and sector leaders. And so I think partnering, so much of this for UNDP is about figuring out the models between private and public sector and what that partnership looks like. And that happens also at the entrepreneurial level, right? So thinking about it at the incubation level. The safety issues of AI are first going to be seen by the innovators around it. And so adopting a raw model, adapting it to your local context, you're going to see the escalations first. And so when I talk about trust and safety, I also define it as like, what are going to be the new escalations and how do you manage that? So it's not just regulation, it's actually thinking through the supply chain and at the local level, then who shares that information? When something bad happens, do you have the infrastructure to help you overcome that obstacle? I think the Silicon Valley has kind of acculturated us to believe that it comes from a legacy of lawyers, of US lawyers, so let's just talk about how litigious that is. But it means that we don't always see it as sharing as an opportunity. We often see it as a liability. And so I think that there's something very important about how it is that we try to get public and private sector together on this one, figuring out how it is that we partner these institutions and not just have them separate. And that's where I think translating all of these compacts, all of these opportunities, especially all the way down the supply chain to entrepreneurs, is going to be super important. And so that I don't think exists yet, but I really want to see that at the incubation stage, where we have places for those that are AI startups to reveal what's happening, what is that they're seeing, what safety problems or escalations they're seeing that they're just not sure what to do about. And so they should be informing, because in the absence of regulation on these specific issues, we have seen time and time again that it will be the startups that will set the new norms. And so I think we haven't quite encapsulated or how to harness that as an opportunity yet, and I'd like to see that, that we're not doing yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've seen that anywhere.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this another dimension, again, coming from the consumer. So the conversation is all about enabling entrepreneurs in AI. I understand that. But if we look at the regulators and how we have failed to regulate the online space, that to me, the social media regulation and the enforcement of, as you were saying, that whole supply chain, the people who create the content, the people who are supposed to moderate the content, age-appropriate content to young people, very important for their future resilience. How do we protect that? So the regulation, the safety is very important that we understand. I think it's a brilliant idea, and it needs to be locally with multi-sector stakeholders, not just business and governments, but academia, civil society organization, mothers, doctors, young people. They're the ones that actually, there's a horrible, realistic movie made by Netflix. It's called The Adolescent. If anybody has teenagers, look at it and cry. Now, I'm from England. I hate to say this. Children in the morning go to school worried about being stabbed. They're exposed to, this is reality in England, London, Baker Street, where I live. This is the reality. Girls are afraid of being raped. This is the streets of London and England, not just in London. The exposure to the violence, this is why I said regulators are important to me. I work with Ofcom, so Dr. Fred Longerford is a friend of mine. We have created in less than 10 months a new global standard authored by Rwanda. Just want you to know that. It was drafted by Rwanda, Professor Vivian from the University of Rwanda. 48 countries have endorsed it. We will be launching it at the AI Summit, inshallah, in Geneva in July. But what I'm saying is the regulators are indeed overwhelmed. They don't have the manpower or the resources, and God forbid, focus. They have water, they have the environment, they have the power, and oh, by the way, they have ICT. When the hell are they going to have the capacity to monitor this? Now, with Elon Musk and with the President of the United States, Mark Zuckerberg has said, well, we don't need content moderators. We're not going to do fact-checking. So you've got kids who live today, my age, we use the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's what I used to find my knowledge from. Kids need to understand how to find the right information. Regulators need to know this has to be taken down now. Service providers have to be held accountable. AI-driven, pushed information that is inappropriate, that is dangerous, that is toxic, needs to be managed. Indeed, you look at the entrepreneurs, but in parallel, safeguarding our children, that's the next generation. They will be the inheritors of whatever we create. Agentive AI Safety Foundation frameworks are there. We've developed it with a whole group of international players from Africa and from Australia, from Latin America, and a few from America, but mainly international. It's there for everybody to use and share. The focus on safety and security is paramount because we're dealing with billion-dollar companies who, yes, indeed, we need our own startups in the African context, in the Asian context, because that's what we have to preserve. But our values, our respect, our dignity, our traditions, you said stories and cultures, I love it. We're music people in my family. Our heritage as an Indian, we have a cultural heritage that we want to preserve. You see young girls all mimicking Botox lips, plastic eyelashes, long nails that can't touch the keyboard because they've been pushed. No, I'm serious. They've been pushed on this image of what is natural beauty. I've never seen so many beautiful women in Rwanda, the young ladies that I've been around, like, wow, what beautiful skin. Don't put foundation on your face. It's a $700 billion industry, all being pushed. This is where the AI comes in. You looked at once, bang, 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 bang. So these are things that are it's funny, but it's dangerous. I'm saying we need to capture this and harness it.
Yeah.
It's all good, but focus on protecting the vulnerable and our heritage.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we make a really good point about accountability, and we could be here all day, because I think, actually, how do we put in place a really
Duty
good
of care.
accountability
Duty of care, magic word.
is something we should be thinking about.
The duty of care.
so-
All of us have that,
Yeah,
duty of
definitely.
care.
So with that, we're going to do something unorthodox, I think, and see if anyone has any questions in the audience that you would like to ask. So I think we probably can take 2 questions at once. I'm not sure if we have Oh, we do have microphones. Amazing. So let's take
We're on
2.
the same
We'll group them together.
Different ends.
And please introduce yourself and what organization you come from.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Foga Prince. I'm from Cameroon, but I actually come from the UK. I'm a student at the University of Oxford, and I'm very happy to see 2 people from my alma mater here and someone who studied the same program as me. My question is directed towards Dr. Salma Albasi.
Okay.
Yes. As a policy student, and as someone who is going into policy, there's this problem of people are actually scared of trusting the government or trusting investors and all the rest. But there's equally this rise in public opinion where people equally want their freedoms.
Yes.
People want to have the liberty to do whatever they want.
Yes.
So as a young policy maker, what advice can you give to me and to everyone equally in this room? How do we synchronize individual liberty
We'll group the questions.
and social cohesion into this world? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. We'll take at least one more question, and we'll see how much time we have.
Hi, how are you? Great panel. My name is Fian Karinge. I am founder of a tech community here in Africa with 10,000 people, and I also work in the agri-tech space. And I really liked your point, Dr. Salma, on inequity in resources. So I think this is what's causing a lot of the bias we're seeing, where we need our perspectives included. And when I look at it as the next generation of tech leaders, I would really love the conversation to shift from Africa being included to us driving and collaborating. And so my question is, how do we then bridge this inequity of resource? How do we get to that point where we're driving and we're collaborating instead of, oh, let's include that perspective? Yeah. That's my question.
Okay,
Brilliant.
that one first.
Yeah, let's start with that.
So I love the question. First of all, the policy has to be very simple. It needs to be implementable. Everything that we do has to put humanity at the core. Whether it's development, whether it's climate change, you need to hold governments to account, and it needs to be interministerial. I find policies, a lot are developed in silos. The policy that we developed in the Gambia, right on the table was the Ministry of Justice, their Cyber Police Unit, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Finance, because obviously they need to roll it out. And it was led by the Ministry of Digital. So and I'm delighted that you're studying policies. Keep it simple and make sure that you get the buy-in of all the stakeholders. That also means the civil society organizations, the schools, the teachers, and the local businesses. So policies are all multi-stakeholder to make it actually be effective and identify the risk. What it is that your policy is trying to implement. Sometimes we write policies for the heck of it, but they need to be for a purpose. If you have a clear vision of what it's for, it will be successful. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Then we'll go to the second question, and maybe some other panelists. We'll start with you, Professor Salma, and then if other folks want to jump in, how do we lead the way as opposed to integrate?
Yes. So as a person who's spearheading several initiatives globally, I can tell you that I deliberately pushed the creation of this global standard to Rwanda because I wanted to raise the profile. When you see the authors of it, you will see they're all from the South that I put there because we have, as you said, we have the knowledge. We just don't have the opportunity. When it comes to AI, I pray and I have great faith in Paula and the leadership of your president of Rwanda. The opportunity for Africa to actually create the global AI safety hub is there because if we stick to the word safety, you will have many, many people with those principles coming to you. If we work and put ourselves out there in every opportunity and we speak, people are listening. People in the North are looking to invest in ethics and innovation for humanity, innovation for good. I'm teaching social entrepreneurship for a reason. Make money, for goodness sake, but do good. Don't destroy or hurt anybody. So I think that money, there's a lot of money available, by the way. It's for the right projects. So we just need to raise our voices.
Yeah.
I think.
Dr. Torres.
Yeah, I think sometimes you don't have to ask other people to give you the platform. And so that's what we did with the Algorithmic Justice League. That's what we did with Gender Shades. And it was really important for me that Gender Shades, again, one of the most cited papers in this space, and the reason I say that is it was co-authored by African women, right? And so you have Dr. Timnit Gebru, which some of you know from Ethiopia, the follow-up with actionable auditing. You had Deb Raji, a Nigerian Canadian, and she was an undergraduate at the time, doing research that put one of the biggest tech companies, Amazon, on edge. This is why we have the book Unmasking AI, the documentary Coded Bias, where you see us as the leaders that we are. So we don't have to ask for permission for what we already embody. That's what I feel.
I'd like to add to that because I want, and I believe it will be the case, that the greatest trust and safety startups will be here. And part of that is that when one has been conditioned to see that you are victimized by the technologies that are already created and out there, you are probably also the most aware of their vulnerabilities and the ways that they make your communities vulnerable. That acute awareness of exactly what it is that is inherently missing in the safety protocols of those technologies will make you the stronger competitors when it comes to the next revolution of trust and safety innovations. The private sector in the big tech sector is already divesting out of the trust and safety space. And just so you know, it's about a $45 billion market year over year. $16 billion of that is just in software. So, I mean, there's an opportunity that's being left on the table that I hope this continent seizes because it cannot keep being the Silicon Valley that's trying to make these solutions. Even in our Reimagining lab that we're launching, a third of the submissions came from Africa. And the ones that came from the Silicon Valley were oftentimes this like posturing of like, we have an idea, but we've never actually validated it in region. And I'm like, well, then I can't. I'm like, why? Why are we doing this? Like, but I'm like, well, then my encouragement is that validate it in region. Like, I mean, I'm not here to do that for you, right? But actually, the local experiences, as you mentioned before, are so vital. They are the most compelling positions. And so what we're trying to do with our co-design lab at the UNDP is trying to get folks to then convert that into a product or service that can then actually drive the global economy around trust and safety and fill the gaps that are already there because you can see the problems. Like all of you have probably seen them, you've been victim to them, I've been victim to them, we don't want to see them anymore. And so, yes, I want you all to take that as like a call to action, build that startup, there's a market for it, do it, and then, have us promote it.
Amazing, amazing. So we're about to time out, and you literally read my last question, which is a call to action. So why don't we just go around to the other panelists? I think we have about 30 seconds left. What would be your sort of call to action for this group? What would we like to see when it comes to trust and safety? Why don't we come to you first, Rachel, and then Professor Salwa?
Sure. I think this has been such a fascinating conversation. I want to echo your question because I think it's one of the most important questions of this conference. Africa is already leading the way in developing some of the world's most inclusive and diverse AI technologies. I'm thinking really about some of the language-based technologies in diverse African languages that are bringing AI to millions of more people and diversifying these kind of global data sets that we know are underrepresented. And then I think politically too, this conference has been unlike some of the other AI safety summits globally where we've struggled to find consensus and a shared global vision. There's a very clear shared vision of AI for social good and centering kind of questions around ethics, inclusion, diversity, and really, really importantly, equality, which often gets left out of the conversation. So I think we're already doing amazing things, and it's about championing and claiming that, like you've talked about.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I think we'll have to reduce that 30 seconds to 10 seconds, unfortunately. Final words. What would you like to see happen?
I think trust has to be earned, respect has to be given, and we need to collaborate.
Brilliant. And Dr. Joy, I think you have some closing words for us.
Yes, I'm also known as the poet of code, so I will end with the poem called Unstable Desire. Prompted to competition, where be the guardrails now? Threat in sight will might make right. Hallucinations taken as prophecy, destabilized on a middling journey to outpace, to open chase, to claim supremacy, to reign indefinitely. Haste and pace control altering deletion. Unstable desire remains undefeated. The fate of AI, still uncompleted. Responding with fear, responsible AI beware. Prophets do snare, people still dare to believe our humanity is more than neural nets and transformations of collected muses, more than data and errata, more than transactional diffusions. Are we not transcendent beings bound in transient forms? Can this power be guided with care, augmenting delight alongside economic destitution? Temporary band-aids cannot be held when the task ahead is to transform the atmosphere of innovation. And so that's my call to action for all of you.
Beautifully said.
Very nice, brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us for this session. I really, really enjoyed it, and thank you to the panelists for all your wonderful insights.
Thank you.
As you mentioned, Africa is already leading, so really looking forward to working with you all in this next moment. Thank you, everybody.